Hi everyone and welcome to Tango Tasters. I want to share something with you today, something called philosophical inquiry. Now it's a term of teaching and learning that I think actually really applies well to tango. So when we're talking about toy boxing, when we're talking about resource development and so forth, I think this is a way we can try and help explain it and express it a little better. I'm going to go through a few things to sort of give you a background as to what it is, but whilst I do that I'm going to show you how it can actually work in a room like the sensory environment in which I'm showing you here. Doesn't mean that you need to use a sensory room, you can use it in any simplistic way you can in your setting. But for me, because I have the joy of being able to do lights, I'm going to show you that as well. So yeah, like I said, community philosophy suggests that inquiry-based learning or philosophical inquiry can work on lots of different levels. It can be dramatic, it can be student-led, it can be teacher-led and so on. But really what we're trying to do is get to the point where the learners are kind of agents of their own learning. What I mean by that is something like this. If I grab this one first and go full screen with it, if you think of structured inquiry as being something that is teacher-led, starts at the shallow end of the pool. It's kind of when students are going to follow the lead of the teacher. What I've always hoped is to try and move away from that end of the pool though and come to this part, which free inquiry will allow the students a greater sense of learning, greater sense of achievement of their learning, and ownership of their learning, but that is notoriously difficult to get to if you don't feel confident with the resources that are available. This guy, Trev McKenzie, on Twitter, and also it's based on something, I think it's by Fitchman 2011. It's worth checking these things out if you're interested in how to develop this fully, but I'm just going to skim around the edges and hopefully show you some interesting things as we do it. But yeah, I try and get to that deep end of the pool, as I say, because it allows this. What we're trying to do is help our learners to become creative, critical, collaborative, reflexive and active. You can see here that I've basically gotten this from Kay Sidebottom and Emma Jane Binks, again two people I would suggest checking out on Twitter, based at the University of Leeds, talking about how these things can be helpful not only to the learner but also to the teacher, helping them to learn. It's an enabling exercise more than anything else by doing this. Some people refer to them as thunks, and a thunk might look a little bit like this. Now if I were to say to you guys, what colour is Tuesday? It's difficult to kind of put into words, right? You don't have to just have an answer. For me, maybe yellow. But expressing what that yellow is becomes difficult. And then there's also the idea of, well, why are we talking about this? What does it help? But starting with this thunk of what colour is Tuesday, in my setting, I'm able to go to shapes and texts, choose a circle, let's say, bring that circle across, and then if I go large enough with it, if I start to play with the fill colour, of course my adaptive lighting is going to change around me, as you can see. Now as I said it was kind of yellowy, I kind of suggest that I'm probably looking at a yellow around about there. Partly because Tuesday doesn't feel like I've gotten away from the weekend just yet. I'd like to think I'm optimistic about what the week can bring, but it's not quite the vibrant nature of, say, Friday or even that kind of Thursday to me. Wednesday's going to be the hardest day always. But so in this case, Tuesday for me, it's got that kind of yellow feel to it. Now, if I can say put that up here, Tango, I can maybe do this for all my learners. I can have this a number of different colours around the board so that I can maybe start looking at how I can engage specific learners with their specific colour. And there's a pragmatic sense to that. So I'm just going to drop back into this PowerPoint. This is a PowerPoint that I put together for the ISTE conference, looking at this in depth. I'll stick these notes up on my Twitter feed after the conference as well, so you can see them at your leisure as well. I've kind of suggested that a yellow is a kind of ownership of truth. My version of yellow may be different to someone else's, and if I weren't to kind of appreciate what that yellow was, then maybe we're going to be talking at cross purposes. You know, we'll work on spectrums instead. Melody Dye is the person that came up with this idea of spectrums of colour for use of pragmatic purposes. Similarly, we can maybe make that by jumping across to umbrellas for learners. Again, Alison Devine is someone I'd suggest looking at in that regard. But I'm going to jump through all this to get to things like this. This is the one. If I know that my colour, so let's say this is me, my colour is in the middle, we could have it so that certain instructions are given to me in the colour that I feel represents me. And it can mean that the learners can start to spot where it is along a wall, let's say, in a classroom. That's a very pragmatic way to consider that. On the other hand, as we said, you could be talking about things like a generalised policy that you might want to work for the school, but even then it's still quite pragmatic. I'm much more about, yeah, as I say, this idea of being able to work along this sort of philosophical inquiry sense. This is how I kind of suggest it then. So if we're working with the idea of a stimulus, in this case, what colour is Tuesday, we're going to pick something. We're going to send the groups away to discuss that. Maybe if we've got a group, a class of 30, we might set them into 5s. They're going to discuss it. They're going to generate some questions based on that. So if they'd all decided that they all disagree, that all the different coloured Tuesdays they have may be as a result of different emotions, let's say, they can maybe decide that their question would be, well, if we have very different opinions, we expect the rest of the class to. On the flip side of that, if they had very similar answers, they may ask why they've come up with that sort of thing. What is it about the environment that's made them think of that sort of colour? Then they're going to pass that on to the group as a whole, see if they've got a bigger understanding of the concepts. And a philosophical inquiry begins. That's where the teacher would maybe say something like, okay, I want to be able to see how you take this idea and research it, be it via technological means or otherwise. So for me, my first go-to will be Google. How do we figure it out? By handing out some iPads around the class. You do some research, try and figure out why certain people might think a yellow or otherwise may be relevant to a Tuesday. See if you can find some scientific reason, see if you can find some psychological reason. And that can go right down to a quite young age even, because they're going to have their own emotional states that they can explain. So it doesn't have to be really high advanced, it can be quite low. After that, they're going to reflect on it, and then we're going to call to action to then decide as a group, as a class, how we're going to use this understanding. Now in a maths sense, in an English sense, in a history, geography, there are different ways to approach it. I mean, history would be perhaps a good example of this, because there's going to be a truth at the end of it that people can discover. Maths, yes, but then I think it's more a question of how we get to the answer, whether they feel that a methodology is more appropriate depending on the quickest way to it or the most easily explained. Same with science. There's some interesting ways that you can look at different types of inquiry within science, and that I touched upon in the Bayou session, for example. But yeah, all this for us at Osborne's and with Tango does play very nicely into our Aurora feed. I mean, Aurora for us is a case of it being not just sensory environments, which implies something quite hardware based. This is more about how do we engage the senses across the board, not just touch, sight, smell, hearing and taste, but two other areas. One of which is the vestibular sense, your sense of balance, and the other one is proprioception, proprioceptive sense, the kind of sense of where you are in the world. Learners who might fidget or hold on or fold arms might be said to be trying to ground themselves in a certain situation. So we want to be able to use these extra elements of understanding, of reaction, engagement, to kind of figure out why someone might go along these lines. And as you can see, hopefully by doing it in this manner, showing you that in this manner, I've kind of got a PowerPoint, but I've also made it a bit more dancing. You can do this quite simply by just having a few slides ready and then setting people off. We can use things like, as we say, the shapes and text, but you can also go into the content as well. Whilst the learners are going off and finding stuff out on their iPads, we can be searching for stuff via content, via file, and searching for it within the banner at the top. Find a way that suits you, but if you are someone who is interested in the idea of philosophical inquiry, I'd be really interested in speaking to you. I find that it's a very interesting and effective way of learning. And like I say, I'm indebted to people like Kay, Emma, Alison, I've forgotten, Mr. Fitchman, Miss Fitchman, I don't know. All these people who have done this far better than I can. But I'd love to discuss it further with you guys if you have any ideas or opinions you'd like to share.